Hello, good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Transport Decision Meeting at Portsmouth City Council. I'm Gerald Vernon Jackson, I'm Cabinet Member for Transport and I will be chairing this meeting. Let's quickly go around and introduce everybody. Simon?
I'm Councillor Simon Bosher and I am the Conservative spokesman for Transport.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney, I'm the Labour Group spokesman for Transport.
Alison Harper, Democratic Services.
Hi, Kirsty Routledge, Principal Transport Planner.
Richard Pemberton, Transport Strategy Team Leader, just joined on Monday.
Welcome.
James Sylvester, Interim Strategic Transport Lead.
Hayley Chivers, Transport Planning Manager.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport.
Kevin McKee, Parking Manager.
Councillor Brian Madgewick, Opposition Spokesman for the Independent Party.
Josh? Okay, folks. Usual stuff. If there's no fire alarm expected, so if there is one, it's real. Please meet with Queen Victoria. We've got no apologies, no deputations. My only apology is that I have another external meeting at 11. So can we assume that we have all read the reports and that we're just updating, if that's all right, if there are other things? So I'm terribly sorry if you've got masses of words prepared, can you not? Yeah, you get three lines. Okay, welcome everybody. So we don't have any apologies, we don't have any declarations of interest. So the first thing is TROs, various transport, well, TROs anyway. So let's start on that. And Kevin, I think this is probably you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. As the report says, we're recommending implementing 2 e-scooter bays, one in Frensham Road and one in New Road, and not to implement a loading restriction at the end of Cosham Park Avenue. One resident wanted it and 3 residents said there wasn't a problem. I think the main problem is vehicles going down the end and idling while they pop into the doctor's surgery or the pharmacy. And I've spoken to the resident who wants the restriction, and we're going to look at other ways of dealing with the idling. Okay, great. And the 2 areas on Frensham Road and New Road where we're looking to put in e-scooter parking, and the one at Frensham Road is part of the turning circle, and it's a big turning circle. The one at New Road is near the co-op, and it's been difficult to find a location that works there on the pavement. Okay, colleagues, any thoughts? Graham?
I mean, these are all local issues. I've not had any representations from anyone or any councillors about it, so I'm happy with the recommendations.
Okay, Simon?
I'm on the same page as Councillor Heaney. They're all local and I've not had any representations on them.
Okay, Brian? Lovely. Okay, thanks so much indeed. I think we're all happy with that. Kevin, it's sold. Okay, moving on. Electric vehicle strategy. Now I have to get to page 29. Also, it tells me. So, who's that? Hello, Hayley.
Hi.
It said Gemma wrote this, not you.
Yeah, Gemma is unavailable today, so I'm covering on her behalf.
Okay.
So the report is seeking approval to consult on a draft electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. The draft strategy elements being consulted on include 4 objectives with a focus on residential, visitors, fleet, public transport and shared transport. And there's a set of policies to deliver those objectives with 2 to 3 policies under each one. The draft strategy is being brought forward following government's allocation of £3.682 million of capital funding and 455,000 of capability funding from the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund. And the strategy builds on the local transport plan and policy B of that.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that. I think I think it's a very sensible thing. I think we've done well so far to have got the EV charging stuff out around the city, and I find it increasingly heavily used. The one on my street, you almost have to queue to get it nowadays. It's clearly we're meeting a need there. My only worry is not what we're doing, it's that the government's inefficiency means that we're not likely to be putting in the next lot until next summer. And I think we're going to need to work as hard as we can to get the Department of Transport to pull their finger out, because people can't afford to wait for that length of time before getting a vehicle. Brian, any thoughts? No? Graham?
Yeah, just a couple of points, really. I mean, this is obviously an overall strategy document. We're going to wait for what the response is. But there are a couple of things. On policy B, you talk about the thing about imperative to reduce the vehicles overstaying in designated EV parking bays. And that's obviously an issue we picked up before. But I'm wondering if the consultation is going to actually pose any questions to the people who are responding. What do you think we should do about it, or do we have some specific things which we know we're going to have to do, and ask them what they think about it? I just think about how we do that, because if I just saw that, I'd be thinking, well, I don't know what to do, if it's a public thing. So I'm just wondering how we're going to sort of pose the question so we get something meaningful back.
So we can tell from the data we get back from each charging point if people are sitting there for hour after hour, or day after day. And I think what we'll try probably to, well, Ellie can say about what will be in the answer. I think we'll probably try to target the ones that are abused and find a time limit that you can be on it for. There's one that somebody's highlighted to me where somebody always arrives on a Friday evening and leaves on a Monday morning because then they don't, because it's in a park. No, it's not in a parking zone, but it just means they get a spot all the time. And now that's not fair for everybody else. Hayley, in terms of a question.
So the draft question will ask residents, businesses, if they agree with the policy and if they've got any comments on it. There will be some more detail around the policy in the consultation material. So we'll make sure that the details of what that might look like is provided in that.
The second point I wanted to raise was that obviously we could only do a certain amount on the highway on lanes we own, but obviously there is potential for other players, other partners, supermarkets, garages to provide parking, provide charging in some ways or other. Are we going to encourage them? Are we going to ask them if they're going to do anything about this so we get a sense of what they're doing in the city? So,
Hayley, I don't know how we would ask because we won't know who they are. But I think Graham is absolutely right. The petrol stations are increasingly putting aside some space in the petrol stations. The two that we've got at the port seem to be continuously in use, and the port's making lots of happy money because of it. The Tesco ones are difficult to get to because they're always used as well. But I think the private sector are realising that there's money to be made and making that decision to move into that. Hayley, is there anything we can do within this consultation on that?
Yeah, we can target businesses. I know there's things like car garages that have charge points that are used perhaps by staff 9 till 5 and then are available in the evening. So we can approach businesses and talk to them about that and whether they might be able to sort of open those up for public sharing.
just thinking, I use the Sainsbury's at Farrington, and I'm sure Simon does well. I mean, they've got a massive car park there. I'm sure they could find some space for some charging points there, which would be good, because if you're coming into Visitor City, you would drop into a supermarket to pick up something, or you know it was there. It's a good place to do that. So, yeah. Anyway, just some ideas, man.
Simon?
It's a strategy document, essentially, that we're approving, so I'm quite comfortable with it. I'd be more interested to see what comes out of the other end of it. Perhaps I'm being a bit cynical, but when you look at something that's with questions that would you agree that the strategy is right, and the answer to that is yes, how much weight do we put on the comments? I'm only saying that because I regularly see residents' parking zones come forward in previous life, and it's usually around, do you agree with the residents' parking zone? And people might put down yes, but I don't agree with the times, but they don't look beyond the yes. So I hope we do a bit of a deep dive, because with the rollout of this, there's going to be a tipping point at some point when electric vehicles are going to be competing with the good old internal combustion engine within the city, and we are going to have an exacerbation on parking if we're not careful. So I think we look at what we're doing now, but we also need to think about what's going to happen when we reach that tipping point, because that's when we're going to get conflict between those people that are retaining their vehicles and are effectively being pushed out of parking in favour of electric vehicles. And with other things coming along, possibly hydrogen-powered vehicles, etc., we could have ourselves an additional pressure on parking if we're not careful. But I'll be interested to see the results when they come out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's go out and consult and see what we get back, and results back, Hayley, next week?
So the consultation's planned to start Monday and will run for 6 weeks. And then we'll bring a report back in December, hopefully, for adoption.
6 weeks? Okay. All right. I'll do what I'm told. Okay, thanks very much indeed, Hayley. Okay, Portsmouth parking strategy. Where, and I will find that. Okay, so who is Kirsty? Yeah, thank you, Kirsty.
Hi, thank you. So this report seeks approval to commence statutory consultation on the draft Portsmouth parking strategy objectives and policies as shown in Appendix A of the report with stakeholders and the wider public. The parking strategy will primarily support the key LTP4 strategic objectives of deliver cleaner air, supporting improvements to air quality and carbon reduction. And the consultation will include the draft's objectives and policies. So there are 3 objectives and 8 policies included. And if the recommendation of this report is approved, then a 6-week public consultation will be undertaken on a designed version of these objectives and policies.
Great. Parking is something that people talk to us as councillors about almost non-stop, because it's always a pressure. And it seems to me we have a strategy that's to encourage people to shift to walking, cycling and other things, but that's a gradual process, and people don't give their cars up immediately. They might leave their car home for 1 day a week more than they used to, but it still has to park somewhere. So providing parking in residential areas to meet the needs of local residents doesn't seem to me in any way to conflict with the other things that we're doing to try to encourage people to transition to being able to use public transport more. So I'm keen that there is no expectation from this that there will be a reduction in parking in residential areas, because that's not the view at all. I think it's sensible to do this consultation, but this is not a way of trying to remove parking in residential areas. I hope actually we can enhance it if we can. Okay, any thoughts, colleagues? Simon?
When's this consultation due to start?
Monday.
That's sort of my point, in the fact that we've got two consultation strategies running side by side. How do the two of them knit together? Because essentially, one's a parking strategy, and the other one, the electric vehicle one, is also, to a point, a parking strategy. So how are we going to tie the two together to make sure that we're getting the answers, not that we're looking for, but strategic answers? And how are we going to make sure that when we're going out to consultation on this, that people look at one and think, well, I've done that one, I'm not doing the other one, to maximise the return? I would have thought it would have been better probably a bit more difficult if we could have done 2 in 1 rather than have 2 consultations essentially about the same thing running side by side.
I think that would have the potential for people not to feel that if you're not an owner of an electric car, or you're not aspiring to become an owner, if you merge the two and it was a parking and EV strategy, I think there'd be a risk that people wouldn't fill it in if they were not a user of an EV. Would be my thought. But Hayley, what's the official view?
Yeah, we've worked closely with the market research team on the best way to do this, and running them side by side. We've got joint consultation events, so we'll be talking about both at the same time in these events and signposting one to the other, realising that they're intrinsically linked because electric vehicles need to be parked while they're charging, but there are separate issues that both need to pick up.
Okay. If I was to give answers about electric vehicle parking spaces in the parking strategy, would my comments be filtered into the electric vehicle parking strategy and vice versa?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. The second point I've got, if I may, I think I might, how long have you got? 3/4 of an hour? See if I can waffle this on for an hour then, shall we?
Simon, you're famous for your waffling.
On page 55, that's Appendix A, Policy B, explore and implement sustainable parking initiatives to enable city centre development. I appreciate that city centre development, but the policy will include a review of public city centre car parks to consider their cost, quality and location. Now, we are going to be losing city centre parking with the development on the Tricorn. Are we looking to replace that parking? Because the inference in point A, and perhaps I'm just been here too long, when you look at a review of public city centre car parks to consider their cost, quality and location, infers that we're doing away with off-street parking in the city centre and not replacing it.
So my understanding is we have way more car parking in the city centre than is ever used. So, and I think something around the number of 2,000 empty spaces. So there is room to lose some without there being any impact on the number of people who are coming into the city centre. And there are some, the Clarence Street car park is almost never used. The one by All Saints Church, almost never used. So I'm keen that we maintain car parking, but I'm not keen to maintain empty car parking that's not ever used, when there might be a better use for it. Is that fair, Hayley?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of specifics, it says we'll review them, so we'll look at which ones are in the best positions and if there is scope for any redevelopment of any. In terms of the sort of Market Way site and any that are up for regeneration, we're working closely with planning and they're developing the parking SBD, so that will be picked up through that process.
And we bought Sainsbury's, which has got a thumping great car park as well. So there's an awful lot of space around there. Anything else, Simon? Graham?
Yeah, I sort of welcome the document. I mean, I think I'm correct in saying that the council passed a motion about 3 years ago asking for a parking strategy, so it's good to see that it's come forward. Sorry? At speed, indeed, yes. The document obviously, again, is a strategy document. It doesn't go into detail, but I think what I'm slightly concerned about is that it still reads very much as a car parking strategy, which is fine because cars are important. But when we had the members' workshops, we raised the issue of cycle parking, like provision of not just a couple of rails, but proper provision of cycle parking, particularly at transport hubs and so on. And it doesn't seem to be reflected in the wording. And I'm sure it will come up in the consultation because I'm sure there are various groups who will put it. But I do hope that we may tweak some of the wording to say that it does include cycle parking and motorcycle scooter parking as well, not just the e-bikes, not just e-scooters. I think that would be good. I mean, I think the parking strategy is going to have to do with two dilemmas. One is obviously as Simon Councillor Marsh has raised the issue about the e-charging. E-charging will take away spaces. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So we will lose spaces. The more e-charging spaces we have, there will be a removal of spaces available for people. So there will be that pressure. And I think we're going to have to accept that if we're going to have more e-cars, which I suppose also makes the point that having electric vehicles isn't the answer to solving traffic problems. The other issue, which you touched on about city centre, is that we need to think about how we incentivise change. How do we incentivise change? There are two ways: provision, i.e. how many car parks do we have, and secondly is charging. And there's a sort of bit of a sort of sideways glance at those, but not really addressed. And I think we need to put that up front, in a sense, to say the ways of managing things is to say this, and then see how people respond to it. I mean, we don't have to tell them, you know, what we're going to do because we're consulting, but we need to get some, you know, feedback on that, and I'm not sure how that will happen. I'm sure some people will do that, but that's my two or three small concerns about the document as it is.
But strangely, I think the most expensive parking in the city is at Gun Wharf, which is the fullest car parking in the city with queues. So price is not always such a strong motivator. Brian?
Is there any plans for regeneration of the city centre? Because there's thousands of hundreds of empty shops and premises, and how many, I presume I must have missed it in here, but how many car parking spaces do we plan to take away? And if so, if we regenerate Charlotte Street and Cascades, etc., Debenhams and whatever, where are they going to park if we take all the parking spaces away?
So we won't take all the car parking spaces.
No, I know all of them, but you know what I mean. So, is it in here somewhere that I've missed?
Well, no, I think in terms of the regeneration city centre, that's a separate project, and Steve Pitt looks after that as part of the regeneration stuff.
So would they build produce car parking spaces if they?
So if there's a need, yes, but if there isn't a need, no. Because producing something that's not going to be used costs money, which we haven't got.
Yeah.
So I think everybody is clear the need to maintain car parking in the city centre to support the shops. It's just whether there's a better use for the car parking that's not used.
Okay, boss. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else from anybody? I think we're all happy for you to go and consult. Thank you very much indeed. And e-scooter. It says Gareth here. Now and you've become Gareth as well.
Yeah, I'm in lots of disguises today.
Just get the tablets out, Simon.
So this report provides an update on the current rental e-scooter trial operating in Portsmouth. The Portsmouth scheme is operated by Voi, is fully wrapped, and there are currently 638 e-scooters in the scheme, spread across 107 wrap locations with 96% parking compliance. The report includes key statistics and details Voi's 3-strike policy for antisocial riding. The trial supports Policy C of the Portsmouth Transport Strategy through the provision of shared transport, and an update report on the progress of the whole Future Transport Zone programme is planned to be brought back in early 2024.
Colleagues, just for your information, I have been asked what our opinion would be about the hours that Voi scooters work, because they currently operate up till 10 o'clock at night, and you can then use them from 4 o'clock in the morning. I've been asked to say that we will fall in line with Southampton and other places that you can use them 24 hours a day, and I have said no. My feeling is that that it's important that we protect people. I have a real worry about people coming out the pub and getting onto a Voi scooter late at night. So I'm sorry, folks, I've said no to this, although Felicity is telling me I'm not allowed to have said that.
No, not at all. Just a point of clarification. So rather than extend for 24 hours, it's extended from 10 p.m. until 11 p.m.
Okay, and I've said no to that as well.
So that's fine. We can talk about that further later.
Yep, so I'm sorry, pubs, I think we've got to make sure that we protect people, and that I think that is not a good idea. Anyway, so any thoughts on e-scooters? Brian, should we come to you first? This is, as you are the e-scooter champion of the city.
I fully expect to go along with everything you say, but I don't need to explain what my feelings are about scooters. You know that, and you cyclists as well. But there we go. In their right place, I think you should actually shorten it to probably between 3 and 4 in the morning. That's the only time they're allowed to use them. That would, I'll vote for that. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Okay, Graham.
I do have a question. I mean, the trial is due to end in May 2024. The government is obviously in a difficult position generally at the moment, and I'm not quite sure how much of a priority it is. And do
I
we
think
know
that's an understatement.
Well, I'm trying to be kind because Simon's here and I don't want to upset him further. If we get to May 24, what happens? Because there will be an election. What happens if they don't renew the trial? I mean, are they giving any indication of what's happening? Because it would be really bizarre to have the trial end and then we'd have to wait for a new government before we get any decision about what's happening. I mean, I'm a bit concerned about what's going to happen there. Does anyone have any idea, or are we completely in the dark?
Simon will know. Okay. So that will be the government's policy, is 24/7, any scooter for anybody. Excellent. Hayley, do you have a more authoritative view?
So, do you mind if I move back to go, sir?
So the trial is currently running till May 2024, with the view that the government are reviewing legislation for all e-scooters, because obviously private are illegal on public land at the moment. We can continue dialogue with them and ask them these questions.
I have no confidence that we'll get any answer.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I do have a couple of comments, if I may,
Of course, yes.
on the bit about priority scooters, because just to say that there's a comment on paragraph 5 about private scooters and the police. I know this is obviously not the most important thing for the police to do because they have lots of other things to do, but I do often get comments from people about riding, and I think my concern about many of the private e-scooter riders is that they seem to demonstrate pretty poor road sense. And also, I consistently see them riding through red lights at Arundel Street, Fratton Road, etc. And one day, a driver, using the green light to go, will suddenly find an e-scooter rider in front of them, and there'll be an accident, and either the driver will run into something else or whatever. So there is a real issue there. I have to say, last night I did see a private e-scooter rider turning right in front of me, who actually used a hand signal, which was the first time I've ever seen one of them do that. But there is a serious point about safety and about, particularly for young kids using them on the road. I really get worried when I see them double riding in front of cars. Now, I put in a freedom of interest request to Hampshire Police back in January about asking them what they've done in the way of enforcement. They refused it on the grounds of cost. And when I challenged, they said they couldn't answer it because it was too costly to find the information.
Well, they haven't done it.
Just let me finish now. When I pursued it further and said, what on earth is going on, they basically said they don't collect the data. Now, I did a little bit of research, obviously, prior to that, and I got some cuttings from newspapers and other FI requests. And what appears to be happening is that there's a level of inconsistency across police forces. For example, I picked up a report from 2022 from Bournemouth, from 2021 from Basildon, Canvey Island and Southend, where they do different things. They do actually enforce. So there is an inconsistency across the forces. So for them to say, for the police to say they can't do this because of, well, why are the police forces doing it? Now, I'm not saying, as I said, that they should spend 24 hours a day doing this, but I have asked before that they should at least publicise the fact that they are trying to advise people not to do it. The other problem we have, of course, is the retail stores who sell these, and I think I've said this before, have small notices on them saying you can't ride them on the highway, but then sell them anyway. e-sale is very difficult because obviously you can't police that. And I noticed there's police are now saying don't buy these for Christmas, but you know there is a real problem, and I think they've got to try and grasp this, and it'd be better if there was a bit more consistency across police forces. I believe Stephen Morgan has asked a parliamentary question. We did talk about this. I'm not sure if he's put it. I think he may have put it a little while ago, but no answers come back about the consistency of enforcement, because I think we do have to do something, and a bit of sort of publicity, and maybe going to schools and colleges to you know tell people, one, about the dangers, and two, about the reason that, because I mean, if you're on an e-scooter, a Voi e-scooter, you've got the insurance system. If you're riding a private e-scooter and you have an accident with somebody, I mean, you are potentially liable to be sued by somebody, you know. So, and people just don't seem to realise this, and so I don't know what the answer is, but I do think there should be more consistency across the board on the way we do this. And if they do introduce these, there's got to be clear standards around the e-scooters that are allowed, and I think we need some really clear rules about that, and that will need enforcement. But anyway, that's probably a debate for later.
But Graham, I think you're completely right. I think it is absolutely clear that what the law says, that you're not allowed to ride private electric scooters on public land, so on the roads and the pavements anywhere. And my expectation is that the police enforce the law. And I've met with the police. I've asked them to do this, because you're right. Places like Bristol, Bedford have their police there have been more active and have confiscated ones that are not allowed to be on the highway. And Hampshire's police's response to me is, no, we won't do anything. And I think that's really poor. And it might be something we need to take up with the police commissioner, because I think we're getting a substandard service in Hampshire from the police, because they're not prepared to enforce the law. I have sympathy with them, because they've been left in an impossible position because of government futility and not coming to a decision on this. But the law is the law, and it should be enforced. So I share your disappointment in that. Okay, in terms of this paper, are we all okay to go forward with it, Simon?
Can I have a few comments?
Of course, yes, absolutely. Sorry, I didn't come to you.
I'll stick to the Voi scooter bit rather than get onto a soapbox about anything that we can't actually change. One of the it's more about understanding how the geofencing works and the blocking areas, and how the reportability works. If we're looking at the Voi scooters, there is a bit on page 72 that talks in terms of the 3 strikes policy and how things are reported. But a ban can be applied for a range of offences, including but not limited to allowing an underage rider to use an e-scooter, pavement riding and twin riding. Well, I see an awful lot of Voi scooters pavement riding, including a whole cohort. It was almost like a Hell's Angel chapter going along the promenade the other evening down near Clarence Pier, which I would have thought was not where we would have wanted them. So I question how the blocking actually works, because I don't think it does in that respect. I'd also be interested to know, of these bans that are put in there, how many of those have actually come from the general public, and how many of these have come from Voi ambassadors, whoever they are? Because certainly where I represent, I regularly see Voi scooters 2 up. It's usually an adult, and it's usually a child under the age of 10 gripping onto the front of it. But by the time they've zipped past at 12.5 miles an hour or whatever it is, any chance of actually reporting it is pretty much nil. Now, I know we can supposedly do this through the Voi app, but I've been looking at the Voi app. If somebody'd like to tell me where I can actually report it, assuming I can get the information in time, I'd be very grateful, because I would imagine that of all these over 1,000 bans that we've actually had, I think the ones coming from the general public are probably a big fat 0, and I don't, or certainly under 10. But I would like to see that particular information, because the whole thing when it came out was marketed on safety, availability, how it was going to be rigidly enforced. But I don't see that. I just don't see that. That's my anecdotal evidence. And certainly on the seafront, middle of last week, there was 7 or 8 of them, and they all looked to me underage, belting along the promenade at God knows what speed, you know, literally charging people out the way that were out using the promenade for what the word suggests it's intended for. And so I regularly see it everywhere. So I'd like some more information, whether something supplementary, because the report I see here is largely a cut and paste of previous reports that we've had periodically over the last few years, perhaps with just some of the statistics updated. And it's a question I've asked before and not really had an answer. I understood that you could track these to within 2.5 metres, I think the figure was that we were given, and that was the width of which you could block them or not. Well, whether they're riding in a cycle lane or on the pavement, that's within that 2.5 metre scope. So I can't see how it can be enforced anyway. I think these are something that's going to be coming along anyway. I think Pandora's box is opened and it's going to happen. But if we're going to have an operator that's going to be operating these scooters in the city, I want to see more around the enforceability, not the periodic safety things they do in the Guildhall Square, where they get them doing some sort of Vietnamese driving test on them, but actually out and about enforcing them. The other bit I've got is around the statistics, and I'm glad that you've actually put in the range date now for all of this, so it actually makes sense. But I come back to some of the things like car trips replaced and, you know, and CO2 equivalent saved. Now, I'd be interested to see where these figures are coming from, because I think they're coming from surveys that, yes, I probably would have used my car and I'm now using a scooter instead. But I'd like to see where we're getting it. Is some sort of Mori poll where you're only sort of like doing 50 people with something like this, then those statistics can be skewed. So I want to see the base statistics that are feeding into those sorts of things, just to satisfy that. And I'm not looking to say actually it's 166 tonnes and it should be 168 or something like that, but I want to have a better understanding of how we're actually achieving these figures, because if Voy are using these things to champion it and say how wonderful we are, then I think we need closer scrutiny on that side of it as well.
That's good. Hayley.
Yeah, so just to pick up on a couple of those points. So the GPS works up with an accuracy, but obviously if a shared use path is adjacent to a road, well, not a shared use, sorry, a pedestrian path only is next to a road, you couldn't block it because they wouldn't be able to ride on the road. In terms of the reporting, it is Voy's website that you can report on. Sorry, I had it and then I've lost it. To make sure I tell you it right. Report.voy.com. So it's on there that you would go. You can also do it by phone and email. You can use the registration plate, but you can also do it based on time and location, and if you've got a description of the person. So the more information, the better, but you don't necessarily need the registration plate. In terms of who is reporting, we have asked that of Voy, and they can't backdate and find that out, but they can, going forward, monitor some of that and see how many are coming from the public and how many are coming from their ambassadors or their staff. And so we can report that to you later. In terms of the statistics, the report does have a couple of points on there, under there, telling you where they're pulled from. So, yeah, I think you alluded to the fact that some of them are from surveys asking users. So we can show you the base data on that as well. So perhaps we'll set up a separate session and go through some of these points in more detail.
Yeah, generally okay. I think I'm asking for stuff that can come back at a later date, really. So I don't see any point in labouring the issue.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, fine with that then. Last piece of business to do is Solent Transport. And who's going to leap in with that?
It's myself, Councillor.
Oh, good. Thank you very much indeed. Leap in.
Councillors, I'll be very, very quick. I'm mindful of the time. Solent Transport Business Plan was approved by the Joint Committee in March 2023. It has to be ratified by the 4 local transport authorities, hence the report this morning. There are 5 key priorities within it. I won't go through them for brevity this morning, but there are 5, they're clearly identified in the report. We agree with that list of priorities, and we therefore recommend ratification of the report. Thank you.
Okay, and I think this looks pretty similar to previous years' ones we've looked at. Okay, colleagues, any thoughts, Simon?
From my past experience, I think we actually have representation that is usually a member and or a senior officer on this anyway. So our views would have been fed into this business plan, which goes through that process. So this is just essentially a rubber stamping of what we've already discussed, or we as a city council would have fed in. Yeah.
You're right, Graham. Any thoughts?
I'm okay with the report. I mean, I would like to know a little bit more about this model that we need to update, because I'm not into commuter modelling as such, because I'm an arts and social science politics lecturer, not an engineer. Because I'm particularly interested in the sort of data we already have. Maybe I'd like to talk to somebody about that at some point, just to get a sense of where we are, because it does look like we are going to have to do something, and it could be a bit costly. And I'd just like to know a bit more about how we use data and how we construct a model, which is interesting from my perspective, but not here now. I shall do it at some other point. So if somebody could let me know.
You get for a private talk offline.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Brian?
I'm happy with it, except I want my bus service in Port Solent, please.
It depends about the level of subsidy that we have to put in. But we know how rich your family are, and therefore, if you're happy to subsidise it, we'll be... Yes. Okay, folks, that concludes the meeting today. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your time.